My father has always been against any confrontation or arguments. He is extremely passive, refuses to stand up for himself, and avoids any conflict. If someone isn't paying attention while walking and bumps into him, he insists it's his own fault. If his employer messed up his salary, he wouldn't bother fixing it. If a mechanic didn't properly repair his car, he would just accept it as is. This unfortunately resulted in a tumultuous childhood with my incredibly narcissistic mother. She controlled his every move. She got him to quit his job and become a locked-in stay-at-home dad. She had him do every chore. She insulted him at every step. She cheated on him relentlessly and even brought affair partners into our home. She enjoyed making his life miserable every day, and he never questioned it. My extended family, God bless them, were there for me so many times as much as they could be. They tried for years to make my father leave, but he never budged. When she would direct her anger towards me in the form of screaming, insulting, or general demeaning, my father never once found the courage to stand up for me or support me. When I was a kid, if I cried to Dad about something Mom did or said to me, he would sweep it under the rug or just insist I forget about it. In fact, he would even try to justify it. As I grew older, it really set in for me how messed up this was. My mother gladly kicked me out of the house when I was 18, and my father just sat there and looked sullen. He didn't say a word. I joined the Air Force almost immediately and got stationed on the other side of the country. The dynamic was awful, and I could have easily gone down the involuntary celibate route if not for therapy and the amazing people I met along the way. It took years for me to get into a better mental space. I was filled with hatred. My mother left my father 2 years after I got stationed and utterly destroyed my father in the divorce. She was ended the life of a year later in a driving under the influence incident with one of her affair partners. I took a lot of joy in hearing that it took her hours to die, and that's when I really knew I needed help to process things. I'm almost 30 now, have a girlfriend who is perhaps the best thing to ever happen in my life, and fully understands the situation with my family. I have learned to not allow myself to be consumed with anger and resentment by my past, or so I thought, you'll see, and instead put that energy towards my future. I have been extraordinarily low contact, nearly no contact with my father since I left. As much as I try, I cannot make that connection with him. I recently went to a family reunion and brought my girlfriend with me. My father was there as it was his side of the family. They have many issues with him, but he is family, so whatever, I guess. I made sure to avoid him. I was chatting with my uncles when I heard my father talking in the background. He was discussing how a coworker of his was going through a divorce, as he discovered his wife was having an affair and was positioned to have a very favorable divorce on his side. My father remarked how his coworker should work instead to forgive his wife, and by his own words, set a good example for unity and forgiveness, and how he believed he set a great example for me in that respect. I swear, it was like a switch went off in my head, and I was mentally back to being the rage-filled 18-year-old. All these years, and he never learned a thing. I turned to him and asked if he was serious. He looked at me and started to stutter. I know the next minute was pure word vomit, and I can't relay it perfectly, but to sum it up, I shouted how he was a pathetic father, a pathetic man, how his family all knows he's a disgrace of a human being who would rather his son be treated poorly than defend him because he's a coward, how no one would ever see him as an example to live by, how his wife would rather engage with half the neighborhood than even touch him, and how he should never believe anyone respects him. I began to derail and ramble between my shouting, and my girlfriend quickly took me out and drove me home. It was incredible just how quickly being away from him made me feel better. She just held me when we got back and told me it's okay. Again, she is the best thing to ever happen to me. I was ashamed of how I lost it, and I am now going to resume my therapy. That's a given. However, I'm glad I finally unloaded what always needed to be said onto him. Extended family had pretty mixed reactions. His brothers, my uncles, said it was time for him to hear it from me. My grandparents are upset I did that in front of the entire extended family, with some saying I should have done it behind closed doors instead of in front of everyone. To add, updated in a new post. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot behind closed doors. You didn't even want to talk to him in any way to begin with. You got triggered after he blatantly lied about how good his marriage was when he knew that what she did was not only not normal, but hurtful, and allowed his child, you, OP, to be abused for years and be kicked out while he sat there and watched, not doing anything. And he had the nerve to say his coworker did that same thing he did and continued the same horrible cycle in the coworker's family. So no, your family who are mad needs to realize they should stop enabling him, especially if he is trying to get other people to do the same thing he did, which could traumatize more people, especially children. So no, I do not think you are the a-hole, and honestly, from the way he behaves and said that, it was something needed. Comment 2. Not the idiot. We all have our breaking points, and sometimes years of unaddressed pain come out in less than ideal circumstances. What you've described isn't just a mishandling of a situation. It's the culmination of a childhood filled with neglect and hurt. Your father's inaction and rationalization of abuse made him complicit. It's unfortunate that this had to happen at a family gathering, but your emotions are valid and don't always emerge according to plan. I hope this moment can be a catalyst for you to find further healing and for your father to finally understand the gravity of his failings. Your next steps in therapy are crucial. Continue to work through your pain without shame. You're reclaiming your voice and your right to emotional safety. Now for the update. A week after the little showdown at the family reunion, I got a message from my dad's sister, Aunt Mary. She invited me and Olivia to a family dinner for my dad's birthday. I was like, do I really want to go through this again? But then I thought maybe this is a chance to clear things up, or at least a chance to tell my dad to his face what a coward he is. Olivia was on board too, hoping that this could help rebuild some of the family ties that had been messed up, especially between me and my dad. So, on the day of the dinner, we showed up at Aunt Mary's house. It was decorated with balloons and streamers, and there was a massive birthday cake on the table. Everyone was in a good mood, chatting and laughing like nothing ever happened. I mean, I guess it was my dad's birthday. My dad saw us when we got there and acted like nothing had happened a week ago. It was almost like I was imagining things. That really got to me. As we were eating, Aunt Mary suggested we play a trivia game about family history. Everyone else was on board, so I just went along with it. The questions were pretty fun, like remembering family vacations and the weird stuff we used to do. Everyone was laughing, but I felt kind of detached from it all. Then came the question about my childhood, and my dad started telling this long story about our family trips. As the game went on, the tension between me and my dad was so obvious, but no one was saying anything about it, not even Aunt Mary, who usually talks about everything. At one point, my brother Jake made this comment about family loyalty, and it struck a nerve, let me tell you. I just snapped. I called out the hypocrisy of loyalty when it came to my dad, who had spent his whole life avoiding confrontation. The room went dead silent, and Aunt Mary looked shocked. Everyone was exchanging these awkward glances, and my dad just tried to brush it off, saying we should focus on happy memories. Happy memories? Like what? Being bullied by my mom while he stood there doing nothing? Aunt Mary, bless her heart, suggested we take a break from the game and enjoy some dessert. So we brought out the birthday cake, and I could feel the heaviness in the air as everyone avoided eye contact. It was like we were all in a sad, dysfunctional family sitcom where nobody wanted to break character. After dessert, Olivia excused herself to go to the bathroom, leaving me alone with my family. My dad tried to start a conversation with me, and I just cut him off. I wasn't in the mood for his weak attempts at bonding. That's when everything came to a head. I told him he never took responsibility for his actions. He pulled the classic line, saying he was just trying to keep the peace. Keep the peace? At what cost? Aunt Mary overheard us, and she chimed in, sharing her struggles with our family dynamics. That surprised everyone, including me. It was like a can of worms had been opened, and we were all just sitting there covered in mess. The conversation shifted, and other family members started to share their experiences, revealing this long pattern of avoidance in our family. It was a different kind of dinner party, that's for sure. The next day, Aunt Mary called me and asked if we could talk privately. We met up at a local diner, and she shared her perspective on family loyalty and the need for honesty. I never thought I'd be having these kinds of conversations with Aunt Mary, but life is weird like that. A few days later, I decided I needed to have a dinner with just my parents to discuss our past. Olivia was all for it, offering to help me prepare for this potentially explosive conversation. The day of the dinner, I was feeling nervous, but ready to face my parents alone. During dinner, my dad tried to make small talk, but I steered the conversation toward our issues. He got all defensive, insisting he did his best, while I pushed for accountability. The conversation escalated, and he finally admitted he struggled with conflict. That caught me off guard. So all these years, he just couldn't handle it? I didn't know whether to be mad, sad, or just plain confused. My dad's admission opened up a whole new set of issues. It made me think about all those times I had been angry at him for not standing up to my mom, and maybe I needed to be a little more understanding about the fact that he just didn't have it in him. That didn't excuse his behavior, not by a long shot, but it made me see him as a flawed human being rather than just a coward or an absent father. So yeah, that's where I am now. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, life goes and throws another curveball at me. I guess it's all part of the long, winding road to healing. Edit. Some people asked why I didn't confront my dad sooner. Honestly, I didn't think it would help. I thought I'd feel better after venting, but I realized it wasn't enough. Others wanted to know why I didn't cut off contact with my dad completely. It's complicated. He's my dad, and despite everything, I still love him. I don't agree with his choices, but I understand some of his struggles now. A few people were curious about my mom. I don't see her anymore, and I'm not interested in reconnecting. My mental health is better without her in my life. Overall, I'm still working through things, but I'm feeling more hopeful. Am I the idiot for contacting an assisted living facility for my mother-in-law without telling my wife? My mother-in-law has lived with my wife and me for 15 years. We've been married for 16 years. Let me say, I love my mother-in-law a lot. I truly do. She is very sweet. This is not a situation where there's hatred or malice between us. She adores me as well. That's part of what makes this so hard. My mother-in-law had to come live with us soon after we got married because she has mental health issues, schizophrenia, and depression, and was having a complete breakdown mentally. We had to have her admitted to the hospital and get regulated on medication to keep the schizophrenia and depression under control. She couldn't live by herself at this point and had to come live with us. On top of this, she has a cognitive disability due to having several strokes over the years. Her mind is like a child or teenager most of the time. The strokes have affected her motor skills. She's not steady when she walks. She can't drive, and she can't perform activities of daily living without help. She is on disability and has caregiving help through the state for roughly 8 hours a day. She also has to have a payee because she cannot pay her own bills and make sound decisions. My mother-in-law is fairly young, in her mid-60s, but drug and alcohol abuse on top of the mental health issues did not do her any favors. Over the years while living with us, my mother-in-law's health has only declined. She is now at a point where she needs 24-hour care in the home. She cannot perform any activities of daily living without assistance. Someone has to go with her to the bathroom all the time and clean her. She cannot dress herself, bathe herself, or make her own food. She can feed herself as long as the food is cut up very fine or it's something she can hold. She is also in the early stages of dementia. She needs a lot of therapy to help with cognitive function and physical therapy to help her get stronger, mainly gait and arm strength. I work full-time and my wife was working part-time. We cannot leave her in the house alone, so we have to structure our schedules to make sure someone is home before the aide leaves daily. We take turns getting up 2 to 3 times in the night to assist her going to the bathroom and cleaning her. We've had to install a call button type system so my mother-in-law can alert us when she needs help if we are not near her room. Sometimes she just can't pull herself up to get out of bed. or she can't move to turn herself over as she needs. My wife is now working as her mother's full-time caregiver in our home. She's been doing this for about 6 to 8 months now. It's taking a toll on her and our marriage. Being her mother's full-time caregiver and being isolated is not good for anyone's mental health. As a married couple that doesn't have any children, our every move is dictated by what her mother needs. We can't take many vacations by ourselves to just connect as a married couple because finding someone to be there with my mother-in-law 24 hours a day for days at a time is very difficult. It's hard for us to just go out to dinner by ourselves. My mother-in-law is very dependent on us emotionally and physically. She doesn't have any other friends, which I personally don't think is healthy. I recently told my wife I feel it's time for her mother to go to an assisted living facility. She and we have done our part. We need to be able to live our lives, travel, etc., like we should be able to, but we can't because of our caretaking responsibilities. I told her I don't want to resent her or her mother 10 or so more years down the road, so I had to finally say something. She feels like she would be abandoning her mother, and now feels like it's a burden on me. It is a burden, but one I've dealt with for a long time as I love my wife and our marriage. I'm very committed to helping in any way I can. I just know there's so much more I or we want to do in life, and this is limiting us. Am I the bad guy for wanting my mother-in-law to go to an assisted living facility? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Here's the thing. Unless your wife is a doctor or nurse, she cannot give the best medical care for her mother. Moving her mother to a care facility with frequent visits offers the best of both worlds. Proper medical staff and care, a mental and physical break for your wife, as well as the emotional love and connection of you and your wife visiting often, and keeping an oversight to make sure the facility is a good one. It is the best and healthiest balance for all three of you. Comment 2. Not the antagonist. Caring for a loved one is noble, but not at the cost of sinking your own ship. It's okay to pass the baton when the race gets too long. Assisted living facilities are like all-inclusive resorts for the golden years. Professional care, social activities, and no one has to argue about who left the milk out. It's not abandoning her. It's giving her the care she needs and giving yourselves the chance to recharge and live your lives. Now, for the update. 2 days after I suggested the assisted living thing, my wife decided to host a family dinner to talk about our situation. Just the 4 of us. Me, wifey, my mother-in-law, and my wife's sister, Clara. Clara had moved back in with her parents a while back to work from home, and she had seen how tough this was on her sister. I think she knew how much my wife was struggling, and honestly, so did I. I thought maybe having her home would be good for my wife. Anyway, we sat down for dinner, and right away, Clara brought up the idea of getting a professional caregiver. I almost dropped my fork. My mother-in-law overheard this and just left the table without even finishing her meal. I tried to follow her, but my wife insisted that we focus on the discussion. Seriously, what discussion? This was the discussion, and it was leaving the table. It was awkwardly silent, and I could feel the tension. My wife was trying to defend her mother, saying how hard it was for her to hear suggestions about assisted living. But Clara, bless her heart, was just like, "You're neglecting yourself while taking care of our mom." I tried to mediate a little, but that wasn't happening. So my mother-in-law comes back to the table, looking like she just went through a lot. She starts accusing me of trying to get rid of her and hating her. I told her that wasn't the intention, but she was just inconsolable at that point. My wife started crying, and Clara looked like she was ready to throw a punch, so she just left the table. I mean, what a lovely family dinner, right? A few days later, my wife mentions that a friend suggested we take a vacation to clear our heads. We planned a weekend getaway to a cabin by the lake. I'm not a huge fan of the outdoors, but I was willing to give it a shot. The day before we were set to leave, my mother-in-law had a severe episode and needed immediate attention. I had to call in a favor from a neighbor named Mark, who had previously offered to help. This guy shows up and manages to calm her down. While I was grateful that he did, my wife was getting more and more upset, feeling like we had to rely on other people to help us out. The vacation was postponed, obviously. During a rare, quiet moment, I overheard my wife talking to Clara on the phone. Clara suggested we take my mother-in-law to a new doctor who specialized in her condition. We eventually decided to sneak in a visit to the doctor while my mother-in-law was distracted. The visit confirmed our worries. The doctor recommended a serious change in care. We went home and confronted my wife with the doctor's advice, emphasizing how important it was to have a plan. She was so resistant, arguing that we should keep trying without drastic measures. I suggested we write down the pros and cons of different care options. That led to a heated argument where she accused me of not caring. I was just done at that point. In a moment of frustration, I decided to take matters into my own hands and contacted the assisted living facility for info. I set up a visit without telling my wife. The visit was eye-opening. It showcased the facility's activities and support staff. I felt like I was finally seeing a solution. Upon returning home, I found my wife in tears after talking to Clara again. I revealed the visit, expecting her to be angry, but instead her reaction surprised me. She admitted she had been feeling overwhelmed and didn't know how to voice it. I proposed a trial period at the facility, emphasizing that it wouldn't be permanent. She hesitated, but agreed to consider it, needing time to think. In a last-ditch effort, I invited my mother-in-law for coffee the next day to discuss options. I planned to present the idea gently, hoping for a more positive conversation. Mini update. The next day, my mother-in-law was surprisingly open to the coffee invitation. She sensed my wife's exhaustion and even shared her struggle with being a burden. I cautiously mentioned the facility, and to my relief, she expressed interest in visiting. We all agreed to go together next week. Am I the idiot for refusing to let my daughter's boyfriend's homeless parents move into my new house? To add, my daughter's boyfriend's parents. So, I bought a ranch-style 3-bedroom house recently. I bought it first and began getting things packed and ready to move, which was a couple of months-long process. I was so excited because this was the first time I would have a place of my own. After finally getting the motivation to end a long-overdue toxic relationship, I brought my mom and my 3 young adult children in their 20s to see the house, and my daughter's boyfriend came along. Everyone was so excited, even commenting about how they might want to move in themselves. In all honesty, this is part of the reason I bought a 3-bedroom house. I want to be there for my kids, who all live on their own, in the event some need arises in the future. Well, a need did arise, just not in the way I had expected. It turns out that my daughter's boyfriend, who is 23 years old, had been paying his mom and stepdad's bills for quite some time. They lived in and out of motels, stayed with friends, and even lived out of their car. Every time they needed money, they would go to their 23-year-old son to get money, and he would give it to them, no questions asked. As a matter of fact, they had his bank card the majority of the time and even took out money from their son's future checks. And their son just let this rabid cycle continue. It got so bad to the point that their son was unable to pay his own rent, buy food, or anything. The son was just doing what he was trained to do. I felt bad and pitched in for food and small items, but it got to the point where my daughter, her sister, and the boyfriend almost got evicted from their apartment because the boyfriend's parents were taking money they shouldn't have been, all the while knowing the kids would all be kicked out. They even dropped off the 17-year-old brother, who has special needs, for the son and my kids to support for the summer, saying it would only be a few days. Now at this point, Grandma, my mom, my daughter's grandmother, steps in to save the day. She pays the boyfriend's portion, with him promising to pay it back. Now so far, I've only given advice to the kids, tried to be supportive, and asked questions to try to understand what was actually happening. But then the inevitable happened. The boyfriend's parents were about to lose their motel room for something like the 10th time and put the boyfriend, their son, into asking me if they could move in temporarily. Sure, they would get jobs, help me pack and move, and only be there long enough to get back on their feet. Am I the jerk for saying no? Now the boyfriend is mad at me, saying I'm selfish, that I have a whole spare 2 bedrooms and that they just need some help. Well, apparently, this cycle has been going on for years, with the boyfriend's stepdad telling the stepson that he had supported them for 12 years, and now it was the stepson's job to do so at only 23. They don't even live together anymore. As soon as the stepson moved out, the parents lost everything. I don't understand how parents can be like this. I never ask my kids for money, let alone to support me. I still teach my kids, nurture them, and help them out in tough situations, because you can expect that from those in their 20s. Part of me feels guilty, though, like I didn't help the homeless. Am I the jerk for not letting the parents move into my house that I wasn't even moved into yet? Not to mention, I've never even met these people before. Should I have let them move in and feel like a stranger in my own home? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, not the idiot, and do not allow those people anywhere near your home. They will never leave. Your daughter's boyfriend is in a bad financial and mentally hurtful relationship with her mother and stepfather and needs to cut ties with them. He is obviously not responsible for them and should start setting boundaries and put a stop to the abuse. You cannot control what he does, but you can control who you let into your house. Comment 2, not the idiot. Definitely do not allow these people to move in. I agree with other commenters about changing locks and installing cameras because I would not trust your daughter's boyfriend either. It would also be a good idea to get to know your neighbors and see if they would be willing to let you know if someone tried to move in before you. Congratulations on your new home. Hopefully you can move in sooner than expected. Now, for the update. A few days after I told my daughter's boyfriend that he couldn't move his family into my new house, he called me late one night. He was clearly upset, like a mess. He told me his parents had been kicked out of the motel they were living in and were now living in their car. He insisted on coming over to talk in person, saying he needed my support. When he got here, he was exhausted and frustrated, sitting on my new couch with his head in his hands. He told me he was considering moving out of his parents' home to escape their demands. He mentioned that his parents had threatened to call the police if he didn't help them financially. I suggested he set firm boundaries with them, but he didn't seem convinced. A couple of days later, he texted me saying he had decided to take a break from his family. During dinner that night, he got a call from his younger brother, who sounded panicked. He said their parents were fighting and hinted they might need to find a place to stay. The boyfriend rushed out, leaving me feeling unsettled about the whole situation. The following weekend, I hosted a small housewarming dinner to distract myself. During the dinner, I noticed my sister-in-law, who had been drinking, making comments about the boyfriend's family. She suggested the boyfriend was partly to blame for enabling their behavior. After the dinner, the boyfriend came over looking more stressed than usual. He told me that his parents had shown up at his apartment, demanding money. He said he was considering letting them stay with him temporarily. He accused me of not understanding his family dynamics and stormed out. The next day, he texted me saying he was staying with his parents. A week later, I bumped into my neighbor, who mentioned seeing the boyfriend's parents at a local diner. The neighbor said they seemed to be in good spirits, which surprised me. When I finally visited him, I found him at home, but the atmosphere was tense. He told me his parents were staying with him, and he was trying to manage everything. I asked about his brother, and he said he had been staying with friends. The boyfriend revealed his parents had asked him to lend them money to cover expenses. A few days later, he called me again, sounding frantic. Later that week, I found out from a mutual friend that the boyfriend's parents had been spotted at a different motel. He learned they were using his money again, which led to a huge argument. In a surprising turn, he said he was thinking about moving away permanently. Edit: the boyfriend ended up moving temporarily with his brother, who had adult friends. After a few weeks, they returned home and took the boyfriend's car without permission. The police found it later, but the parents were not around. The boyfriend has since cut all ties with them for good. If you liked this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.